Hi everyone, welcome to week 5 of English 102. So this week we're working on analyzing our primary research, with which hopefully you've completed your survey or interview by this point. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about working thesis statements. So I know that the last 4 weeks have been pretty fast in kind of gathering sources and figuring out what you're kind of learning about the culture that you've chosen. And next week, we'll be in week 6, which is only a couple weeks from the end of our semester. And we're going to actually start to kind of bring all of this together finally into a research essay. So if you're kind of like, man, this kind of is taking a while or it's really fast, either way, hopefully next week some of these pieces will start to fall into place. But the working thesis statements that I'm going to talk about today will help you in kind of thinking about your essay that will start next week. So the 2 assignments we've got for this week, research reflection number 5. This is an exercise from our textbook called Dialogue with Dave, and I find it really helpful in figuring out your working pieces. So we'll get there. And then the primary research transcript and analysis are due this coming Monday. So whether you did a survey or an interview, what I would need by Monday is your survey and responses and some kind of analysis of them, and then your interview questions and answers, and then an analysis of those. There are examples of both on Blackboard that you can use, but I'm going to talk about that assignment first. So your primary research results for either option, you have to have the actual survey or interview included, and then the responses to those questions, and then the biggest portion of this assignment is the analysis itself. So I don't want you just to give me, okay, here's the questions I asked and the person's responses, but I want you to actually analyze them somehow, make sense of them for me, okay? And then there's also, a small portion of the assignment for proofreading, editing, APA format, that kind of thing. So in thinking about your analysis, read over your responses either on your survey or interview, and then ask yourself, how do these responses help me answer my research question? What's interesting here? What's maybe different from what I've seen, different from my own experience, kind of what's similar to the secondary sources from my annotated bibliography? Also, what questions do you still have? What questions did your interviewee not answer for you? Or what questions did your survey sort of add to the culture that you're looking at? And finally, you can also think about, do you see any bias in your questions or in the answers? One of the example surveys that I share on Blackboard, that student says that she felt that her survey was a little biased only by the simple fact that she surveyed people on Facebook who she's already friends with. So it's not really the most sort of varied sample size, we could say. But I want you to kind of think about these questions in the analysis portion of your assignment. The other thing I'd like you all to think about is how you can make sense of open-ended responses. This is something that one of your readings this week talks about, the analyzing a primary research study. So this is part of that example. But what you'll notice in the article I'm asking you all to read is that this person had a bunch of responses to open-ended questions, and what they ended up doing was coding them somehow. So grouping similar responses together and sort of noticing themes in them. So here they used plus or minus as something positive or negative. Then they added bolded words here like bullying, fake, connection, reaching people. And then for the responses, they also added like age and gender. Your responses may not be this detailed, but I want you to think about, especially if you did a survey or multiple interviews, this is a way that you can make sense of all of that data, because you're gonna have a bunch of people's words and you need to kind of see, okay, how do I compare the responses to each other? So, this is why also it's important to, when you're doing a survey, keep the open-ended questions sort of to a minimum, because you're given a lot of information to make sense of. So I would recommend categorizing your responses somehow, coming up with your own themes, or maybe grouping them together into different, make a table and see if you can make sense of it that way. I want to encourage you to do what works best for you. but the reading on analyzing primary research will really help you here. Again, I want to emphasize though, this is the first time a lot of us are doing a survey or an interview. I don't expect you to be the world's best researcher right now. So if you feel like the best that you can do is kind of say, these are the themes that I noticed, perfect. All right, so for example, this is a response from a survey that I did in a class last year around Halloween. So I asked my students to respond to the question, please briefly describe a memory you have of Halloween or one that sticks out in your mind. So if these were the responses that I got 7 responses, I'm gonna ask myself, okay, how can I categorize or code these? So what I want you to do is take a minute, pause the video, and what kind of categories or what kind of similarities or themes do you notice? Okay, so what's important here is that I gave you my research question. Why do we celebrate Halloween? And when I look at these responses, a couple things I notice. The mention of trick-or-treating is here, giving out candy, Halloween parties, also costumes and characters, Batman, Mario and Luigi. They mentioned Legos. I also noticed candy a few times. And then something else I noticed is that they mentioned things when they were younger. So, let me see, when I was a little kid, when I was younger, I was about 7 or 8, when I was a child. So maybe my understanding of my research question, why do we celebrate Halloween, could talk about we celebrate Halloween because of the sort of connection to trick-or-treating as a tradition, but also a way to involve children in holidays. And this becomes maybe less important as we age. So that may not be what you got from these responses, but I want you to actually look at the responses that you got and analyze them somehow. Group them, categorize them, see similarities or things that stick out to you. I don't want you just to give me all the responses and say, okay, I'm done, because that's not actually doing the work of synthesizing these things. All right, so the other thing I want to talk about is a working thesis. So I'm gonna give you another question. Considering the sources you found so far, what have you learned, that should say, about your culture that you didn't know before? How, at this point, might you start to answer your research question? So to do this, you're gonna need your research question first. So the answer to your research question is going to be your working thesis. So to help you do this, I'm giving you guys a research reflection that will kind of ask you to go through, okay, the answer to your research question, that is your thesis. So you might remember thesis statements that we focus on a lot in English 101. These are what form the basis for a written essay, and you guessed it, it will form the basis for your research paper. So it's okay though if you're not really sure at this point or what you have is kind of shaky. That's to be expected. So the research reflection I'm having you guys do will hopefully work towards this. But let's look at an example from a research project that I might do as an instructor. So let's say the culture I was looking at are teachers during the pandemic. And my research question is, in what ways have teachers been impacted by the pandemic? My answer to that question might sound something like, emotional burden and stress have had the biggest impact on teachers during the pandemic, not just for themselves, but for their students. This is leading to a record number of teachers leaving the profession, and the future of our education is definitely in flux. So a couple things here. You'll notice that there's a connection between my question and my answer. All right, they are related, okay? What you'll also notice is this is not a question, it's the answer, right? So also, someone else might disagree with me. Another instructor might say, actually what I dealt with more during the pandemic was like loneliness and not, being physically in my classroom. So your thesis is going to be the answer to your research question, and it can also change, but it should be different from someone else who's maybe looking at the culture you're studying. So the dialogue with Dave exercise we're doing in our reflection this week, it asks you to kind of think about Dave as your reader for your project, and he has questions for you. So what you're going to do is you're going to look at his questions, and then for your topic, you're going to answer them, all right? The answer to this final question, based on everything you've learned so far, what's your point? That answer is your working thesis. So hopefully by next week, having analyzed your primary research, and thought through a working thesis, we'll start looking at your research essays from a more cohesive standpoint. All right, so I'm really excited to see what you guys come up with for your primary research. And I also encourage you to email me if you get confused, or if you need an extension, or if you're like, hey, I am drowning, I don't know what's going on. So I'm here for all of those and any other help you might need. So I will see you online, and hopefully I don't know what I was going to say after that. Man, guys, this has been a long weekend for me. All right, well, I'll see you soon.